Hashem, today we'll learn the sugya, or at least begin the sugya, of Gadol Omed al Gabav and the status of a cotton and the Gadol. And we'll start with the Mishnah on Daf Chaf Beis Amid Beis. Hakol Ksherim Lichtov Es Haget, Afilu Chere Shota V'Katan. And the Gemara immediately raises the question on the last line of Chaf Beis Amid Beis, V'Halav B'nei Deyanin. And the Gemara is assuming that Chere Shota V'Katan, insofar as they don't have das al pidin, then how could it be that their get is kosher? And the assumption here is that we're operating according to the Shita Rabbi Elazar, who holds that a get needs to be written lishma. We'll see later on that there's another option in learning the Mishnah, but right now the Gemara is asking how can it be lishma according to Rabbi Elazar requires lishma in the case of Cher Shel V'Katan, and the Gemara answers Amar Afuna. So I would, if you're, I see that you're writing a little notes here. Yeah. So if you could write Roman numeral number 1 here. Yeah. Okay, so that's the names are not so important, but the Roman numeral number 1 is important, and that's Rav Huna. And here we look at Chav Gimel Amid Aleph, for who she Haya Gadol Omed Al Gamal. Now let's emphasize Rashi here. Rashi says the Omer Lo, meaning the Gadol says to the Cher Shel V'Katan, Ksov Litzorech Ploni. Write it on behalf of so-and-so. And that itself means that we can assume that the Cher Shel V'Katan is following instructions. And the instructions that were given to him were that he should write on behalf of so-and-so. And therefore, there's what we call Gomer Belibo. He has a decision, so to speak, to be mechaven that exactly the way the Gadol commanded him to write it on behalf of the Baal. So again, according to Rav Huna, our Mishnah reflects the Shita Rabbi Elazar that Edi Masira Karsi and V'Kosav Law in the Torah refers to what? To the writing of the get. And therefore, for Kosav Law Lishma, the Lishma has to be in the Ksiva, not like Rabbi Meir, as we'll soon see. And therefore, when the Mishnah allows the Ksiva of Cher Shel V'Katan, how does that get become Lishma? The answer is that the Gadol is being mechaven, he's sort of directing the Katan, or in this case, the Cher Shel V'Katan, to write the get for the purpose of so-and-so. And that's already considered Lishma. Now again, we're going to have to come back to this Rashi later, because one of the most important paragraphs here in this essay, which is called Gadol Omed Al Gabav, is the following. You don't have to bother looking at it. Let's read it out loud. He says, Nechleku Rishonim Begeder HaToeles Shel HaGadol Omed Al Gabav. And he has 2 shitos. Shita number 1, he says that Yesh Toeles le'etzem kavonas hakoton, machshavas hakoton, shehu hakoton bi'atzmo mechaven al yidei hagadol. Thus, the gadol will teach the koton to be mechaven. Oh, there's another definition. Shema, perhaps lo shayach shakoton yase machshavas lishma hamachshava reuya, ela shahagadol shehu omed al gabav hu atzmo mitztaref lasiyas hakoton, which means this is a kind of a magical formulation. Yeah, it's like the cotton does the Masechet siva, but the kavanah is being supplied by the gadol, and somehow there's a tziruf, an integration. And that second interpretation is the Rashba, which we'll see in Mirza Hashem in a few minutes, and the Pella, that you can somehow integrate the mice of someone with the kavanah of someone else. In Shechita, that's going to be a real problem. And we'll see if Gadol Omed Al Gabav applies to the Shechita of a Katan. In any event, so far we have Roman numeral number 1, and then we move on to the Gemara's Kasha. The Gemara wants to reject this pshat because the Gemara is going to prove that in the case of an Oved Kochavim who writes a get, even if Yisrael's Omed Al Gabav, it's not meaningful. And according to your logic, that Gadol Omed Al Gabav could solve the problem and direct the person who's writing the get to have the kavanah lishma, then Gadol Omed Al Gabav should be equally meaningful in the case of Oved Kochavim. And the Gemara is going to prove from a brisa that an Ovid Kochavim is possible for Ksivas Haget. And the Gemara answers that Ovid Kochavim L'daite de nafshe Ovid. Like he's a big boy, right? And he has his own pattern of thinking, and he's not going to be Mechavi necessarily for the purpose of this Isha. Or perhaps, as Rabbi Akiva Eiger understands, now here is a very important footnote in the Masifta. I don't think it's necessary to take time to. If you want to just take a picture of it.
If you don't have, is it not part of the pages? No.
No, this is on the daf.
In the Gemara itself.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know why he didn't incorporate it into the essay. So you rely on Torah Sheba'al Peh, yeah? Okay. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger has the following chiddush. He wants to say the following. What the Gemara is postulating is that we never know, in the case of an Akum who's writing a get, even if Gadol Omed al Gabav, we'll never be sure whether or not he writes the get Lishma. And therefore, the get is always a suffix Lishma, suffix lo Lishma. And now what happens in a case of an Akum who, after writing the get, but before the get was delivered, he's misgayer. And he claims that what he wrote yesterday, when he was a guy, he wrote Lishma. And believe it or not, according to the approach of Rav Akiva Eiger, the get is kosher. Could you imagine? We only passel the get written by a guy with Gadol Omed al Gaba because we're not sure if the Gadol Omed al Gaba successfully, how should I say, was machaving the Akum to write Lishma. We don't know. But if he's misgayer and he tells us that he did have kavanah Lishma, the get is kosher. And on that,
this might be telling on the two
understandings of how Gadol Omed al Gaba works. According to the understanding that it's actually it's actually the lishma, it's actually the kavanah of the gadol. It sounds like the Gemara's answer is that only works when there is a vacuum, when there is no other das in the picture. And now, so the fact that he would convert afterwards, it's not a question that we're not sure. It's just, it doesn't work. Right.
And why doesn't it work? Because
there was at the time there wasn't a vacuum. At the time there was one person's kavana and the gadol's kavana. The gadol's kavana can't work when there is other kavana in place. It only works with the katan because there is no das.
I thought the simple one would be to say the opposite, but I think you gave a good hezber for why that makes sense. Is the gadol supplying the das, not the kosev? So then they could be a Jew, a non-Jew. It doesn't matter. You're explaining that.
No, but the Gemara is answering why it works for a katan and not for a goy.
Right, so you have to explain that sheet, right?
Like what Rabbi Akiva Eiger is suggesting doesn't seem to make sense if
it just supplies it.
Right. It's not. What do you mean? What's the suffix here? If it's the gadol's kavana, who cares what the goy says afterwards? Or is it only a problem
if the goy's working against the guy? I guess it becomes a little complicated.
So let's go through this. According to Rabbi Akiva Eiger, if you want to integrate Rabbi Akiva Eiger with the approach that the Rashba is going to take him into Hashem, that the and the Lishma is coming is being supplied by the Gadol Omed al Gaba. So what difference it make if so unless we're going to say that Al Daitin Nafshin means that he has a negative covenant.
Right, if he's counteracting it, it doesn't work. Like maybe Right.
So then Eiger is going to say that if he doesn't have a negative kavanah, then we could have to go a little bit of a gap.
Is that also a chiddush that we trust a Jew about what happened back before he was a Jew?
I guess that seems to be a pretty solid premise. But in any event, what I wanted to point out here in this comment of the Masifta, he quotes Reb Chaim Alevi, and Reb Chaim is going to have a chiddush about a get written by an Akum with Gadol Omed al Gaba in Hilchas Tefillin. I never would have thought to look at Hilchas Tefillin, and there he writes that Ovei Kochavim Mufkal Legamre Midin Lishma. So when the Gemara says Adaiti Denafshei Ka'ovid, it doesn't mean the way Rabbi Akiva Eiger understood it, and probably the way we would simply understand it and translate the words as being that he has a different kind of kavanah, he has a different agenda, this guy, but rather it's saying something about the gavra of the akum vis-a-vis the possibility of generating lishma, that he's mufkal legamre midin lishma. The kevan shekosev al das atzmo lo shayach etzlo lasos tzivui abal. In other words, there's no connection here between the Baal and Lishma means that the Baal is mandating the writing of the get, and with that mandate, the get is written Lishma. There's no connection here between the Baal and the guy who's writing it. Ubalot tzivei Baal ain din Lishma. There's no din of Lishma without the tzivei Baal, and the tzivei Baal is not going to have an impact on the guy, and therefore afim yichtov Lishma. Even if the guy we know wrote Lishma, and even if he was misgayer, again, we're adding that, and he testifies that when he wrote the get, he did have kavanah Lishma, it still is a hafkas hagavra because he cannot create Lishma. And the reason why he cannot create Lishma has to do with the tzivei Baal. And of course, we can guess that the Chazon Ish is going to have a different approach, but in one sense, the Chazon Ish agrees with Reb Chaim, and ein goy bar hachi lichtov lishma. So both Reb Chaim and the Chazon Ish are agreeing that, as opposed to Reb Kiva who says that a guy is really capable of writing lishma, but the problem is we don't know if he wrote lishma. According to this approach, he cannot create a lishma. He's mufka from writing lishma. And perhaps you could say, in addition to the fact that, as he quotes from Chaim, that he's not going to write the get lishma as per the tzivei the Baal, maybe we could add even more than that. That in order to create lishma, you have to be included in kedusha. Like we said, that a guy can't be a shliach for get, and the Gemara concludes the reason for that is because he's not a bar krisus. So maybe we could say if somebody's not a bar krisus, then he can't create a lishma to get. But again, that could have repercussions elsewhere. Like maybe we'll see about chalitza. We'll see about shchita and so forth. Okay, so Ad Kan Roman numeral number 1. Now we go on to Roman numeral number 2, and that's going to be Rav Nachman's understanding. And Rav Nachman's going to say that, you know what? When it says that a guy is possible for writing a get, that's only because there's a requirement of lishma. But our Mishnah doesn't require lishma at all. Why? Because the requirement of lishma reflects the shita of Rabbi Elazar. But we go like, and our Mishnah reflects the shita of Rabbi Meir. And according to Rabbi Meir, there's no question that a get that was written by a cheresh katan is not worse than a get that you found in the Ashba, meaning there's no din of lishma at all. And that's why the Mishnah says that a cheresh katan, if they wrote a get, it's kosher. And for that matter, even an akum who wrote a get is kosher. Now you wonder why the Mishnah, according to Rabbi Meir, had to bother telling me this. But maybe the issue is a drabanaj. We have a gzera that if the ksiva was by someone who cannot create lishma, then maybe somebody's going to think that there's no din of lishma at all in a get, even as far as the chasima is concerned. Kamashma, the Mishnah is, again, I'm just adding that as a possibility. But that's Roman numeral number 2, that our Mishnah here that is machshir get written by Cherishot v'Katan is really the shita of Rabbi Meir, that there's no din, there's no requirement of ksiva lishma in the get, and therefore the answer that was offered here by Rav Huna was predicated on the premise that our Mishnah reflects shita Rabbi Elazar, and you need ksiva lishma. Then you have no way out other than to introduce gadol omer al gaba. But if we hold that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, and there's no requirement of lishma in the ksiva get, you don't need gadol omer al gaba. Now we get to Roman numeral number 3.
And then we assume, according to Rabbi Meir, though, that there's no requirements, as long as we somehow have the words printed on the paper with the information that we need, we're good.
Good.
It's a goy,
As long as the chasima is
there's no
lishma.
other requirement besides lishma. There's no other requirement to make something to a get. Just as long as the words
Well, no,
are
I
here.
wouldn't go that far, Daniel. I mean, you need chasima lishma.
No, afterwards. I'm saying in the ksiva.
In the ksiva, no requirement whatsoever. Find it in the garbage, and it was written by a monkey. It's kosher. Now we get to Roman numeral number 3. And that is Rabbi Yehuda Omar Shmuel. And he says the following. that our Mishnah is not talking about a Cherish Sotav Katan who wrote the entirety of the get, but rather a Hu Shashir Mokom Torah. So what did the Cherish Sotav Katan write? He only wrote the Tofes Haget. And even according to Rabbi Lazar, there's no requirement of Lishma in the Tofes Haget. And therefore, there's no need for a Bardas to write the Tofes Haget. And the Katan wrote only the Tofes Haget. So even though he's not capable of Lishma, but he left out the Toref, and the Toref will be written by a Gadol, Lishma. Now, here's the question I want to raise. In the relationship between Roman numeral number 1 and numeral number 3, what do I mean? Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel does not seem to accept any possibility of a get that was written by Cherish Sotav Katan, meaning the entirety of the get, including the Torah. It doesn't exist. Otherwise, the Mishnah is understood. And it's very possible, and I think even likely, that Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel was of the opinion that Gadol Omed al Gabav is not going to be meaningful as far as Lishma and a get. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel has no choice but to find a different justification for the allowance of a get to be written by Cherish Sotav Katan. And basically, the Mishnah never allowed a get to be written by Cherish Sotav. Okay, Tofes is fine, but whenever there's a requirement to Lishma and the Torah, then a Cherish Sotav Katan cannot be capable of writing the get. So don't tell me anything about Gadol Omed al Gabav. But if you drop Gadol Omed al Gabav, which is an ukimta in the Mishnah, then you have to come up with another ukimta in the Mishnah. Alternatively, that the Mishnah is only talking about a Cherish Sotav Katan who wrote what? Wrote the Tofes Haget, but not the Torah Haget. And if you take a look here in this essay for a moment, he says the following. Now, this is on page Mem, and you'll see Aleph, Beis, and Gimel. That's I think, corresponds to our Roman numeral number 1, 2, and 3. Umisbarer, look at this. Shenechleku tiretz Aleph and Gimel. Right, there is a machlokas between the first teretz, which is Rav Huna, and the third teretz, which is Shmuel, in the following way. What would be the status of Gadol Omed al Gabav in a case of a Katan who wrote the Toref Haget Lishma? L'tiritz hashlishi lo yoel ksivas Katan afilu begadol Omed al Gabav. Again, that doesn't appear in the Gemara, at least as far as I know. But from the fact that he offered an alternative approach to Mishnah, and he was not satisfied with the Ukimta of Rav Huna, that's because he held that Al Pi Din, even if I accept Rav Huna that there was a Gadol Omed al Gabav, it wouldn't help at all. And the only way out, therefore, is to introduce the Tofes. The Yesh Levaris HaMachlokas Madua L'tiritz Risha Moil Gadol Omed al Gabav Varein Bodas U'L'tiritz HaShlishi Madua Lo Toil Ksivas Haget Lishma with Gadol Omed al Gabav if it was written by a Cherish Sotav Katan. And that's where he introduces in the paragraph Nechleku this Hakira as to whether or not the Gadol is teaching the Katan and supervising and guaranteeing that the Katan will have the right kavana for the purpose of this Baal, etc. Or no, it's not the Katan that can generate Lishma. The Katan is a Labardas, but rather the Gadol Omed al Gabav, he's going to supply the kavana of what? Of Lishma. And there's going to be a tziruf between the Maaseh of Cherish Sotav Katan in the Ksiva and the Kavanas Lishma of the Gadol Omed al Gabav.
I'm going to step back here.
Yeah.
And maybe, what does it mean that a Katan doesn't have das?
Oh, that's what this is about.
Oh,
Yeah, good.
There are plenty of 12-year-olds that we know that have plenty of das. Unless it's like some technical like formality.
A halachic legal status
Right,
called
I don't-
das.
someone being there and
Like the Vilna Gaon may have known Shas at the
Yeah.
age of I don't know,
Right.
some say 8, some say 6, I don't know what.
but he couldn't
But he could
he
not.
couldn't know that this was written for this man and this woman.
If we're saying that you need das for ksivas haget lishma, which seems to be the
Yeah.
premise of the Gemara, we're going to
Correct.
question that Paris as we go along. Then even the Vilna Gaon is considered labar das. His kinyonim are not recognized. His Maaseh Kiddushin
Right,
is not
but
recognized.
some things might be a formal technicality until you're a gadol. So there's nothing we can do, and others might just be like we don't know.
and someone being there
So we're
and
gonna
being
try-
being malami, that might still also come back to the two different answers we started with.
But what we're gonna try to do today is define what is das, and perhaps a different concept which doesn't require a das. That's called kavan. And although very often we equate the two, but as we'll see in the name of Reb Chaim made with a razor, he split the difference between kavana and das. And whether or not you need das to create the shema, that's going to be the issue here, perhaps in Cherishot V'Katan, because it could be the Cherishot V'Katan is capable of kavana, but he's
But
not
not
capable of das. And how do we know that the Cherishot V'Katan had the kavana, even if you don't need das? That's going to be Gadol Omer Al Gaba. So the Gadol Omer Al Gaba is going to, in a certain sense, play a secondary role to somehow guarantee that there is kavana. But when we need das, then Gadol Omer Al Gaba is not going to help.
That answers Tos's question over here. Tos definitely compares the two. He asks his whole question from shchita, and the issue of shchita is kavana, is not
Kavana,
das. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So we're going to go. I don't know if we'll go through the entire Tos. That would take us a month, but part of it. Now here, in the paragraph Tosfos, which is what Daniel was referring to, he writes that Mashimol Gadol Omer Al Gaba Fukshemalando Masiru Lasos Lishma Who Pirshu. So again, Tosfos, like we were Medaikin and Rashi, also seem to imply that it's the Katan who is generating Lishma. Shemash Shaninu Bereish Kulin, but Kulin Sheshachta Lacherim Ron also Shchitasik Shera. And the Gemara says, what does that mean? Shchitasik Shera, and that reflects the Shita of Tanakama, that you don't require Kavan and Shchita, implying that if you would require Kavan and Shchita, then Gadol Omer Al Gaba would not be a solution to the problem. Medubar she'eno malamdo lechavin lishcha elarono. So he's only a spectator. He's not actually supervising the shchita that should be lekavana shchita shmashkiach b'maisa. Aval eno more kate eno morlo. He's not teaching him kate lechavin. Aval beget moel Gadol Omer Al Gaba. So it would seem from Tosfos that according to the Tanakama, you don't need kavana in shchita. So that means that roen osana cherim. What does it mean shchitasik shera? Shchitasik shera means that he cut two simonim or rov shnai, whatever he cut, without any psuli shchita. That's all that it's going to help. But if there was if there was an issue of kavana in shchita, which is not the shita of Tanakama, then Gadol Omer Al Gaba presumably would not operate. That's what it seems from Tosfos, and that's going to be a pella on this entire sugya that we're going to learn. And now he quotes a Gemara in Yevamos, and this is going to be the main focus of our discussion today. But I think there's a better paragraph here for the Gemara in Yevamos. Just see where that is. Just 1 second. Yeah, that's going to be here on Daf Mem Aleph, on page Mem Aleph. Do you see where it says Dalid Chalitza? So there he really quotes the Gemara in depth. And this is a sugya in Yevamos Kuf Dalid Amid Beis, but it's really based on an earlier sugya on Kuf Beis Amid Beis. And it says there that cheresh v'chereshes nismatu michalitza. Again, instead of the word nismatu, you could use the word nifsalu mishchita. Kevan she'enon, what?
Chalitza.
Chalitza, I'm going to say. Kevan she'enon b'nei kriya. And the Gemara says the following, that even though chalitza without kriyas haparsha is kshera b'diavad, but nevertheless you need a bar hachi of kriya. And the Gemara operates with the principle of kol eno roy lebila bila ma'keves. And then the Gemara goes on to say that katan is excluded from chalitza because of the pasuk ish. Frektosis, I don't understand. Why do I need labar kriya? Why do I need ish? Madua lo nismatu mitam she'eno b'nei kavana. And Tosis is going to answer because Gadol Omer Al Gaba is going to be valid. Shrei Mavur Sham B'Gemara, Shekol Zman, this is a sugya a little bit earlier there, Shelo Iskavnu Shneim, meaning the Cholitz and the Choletzes, HaChalitza Psula. So we see clearly that in the case of a katan, he's not capable of kavana, and now the Gemara says Kol Shalon Iskavnu is Chalitza Psula. Why do I need the word ish to exclude the Chalitza of a katan? Or alternatively, why do I need Eno Bar Kriya to exclude the Chalitza of a Cherish or a Chereshes if kavana is an absolute requirement in Chalitza? Closest answers, there is a gadol omed al gabav. Who's the gadol omed al gabav? Kevan shebezdim ashirin osam liskavin the lachlots. Harezek a gadol omed al gabav. Bezdin is like gadol omed al gabav. The ein bechalitzos of chisarin kavana. So even though kavana is critical in chalitza, nevertheless, in the case of the chalitza that's overseen by whom? By the bezdin, and they're going to make sure that the chalitza is done with the right kavana. The chalitza is going to be possible because of either la bakri in the case of cherish chereshes, or because of the mid of ish in the case of a katan. Okay, then, so that's more or less what he's referring to here, back on Daf Mem in the end of the paragraph Hatos. Now we have a Rashba. The Rashba quotes Rabbeinu Harabza. Okay, we're not sure who that is. Some say it's Rabbeinu Yon. Which would be very interesting because Rabbeinu Yonah and the Rashba were more or less contemporaries, but Rabbeinu Yonah died before, before the Rashba was writing his Kedusha. It says the following.
Where are we now? So
we're now on the bottom right of
okay,
them.
we're back.
Shalomoil gadol omed al gab dak b'makom shemoila shlichus. And this is a Pella Baraj, name of Yonah. All Dover, this is on the top left column here, page map. She'efshal asosa idei shliach, then gadol omed al gab is meaningful. Why? Havi kavanas hagadol she'omed al gabav kekavana ha'ose midin shlichus. Or if you take a look at the last line in this paragraph, he says that avol beget she'efshal lemanos shliach leksivas get, right? As opposed to, let's say, for example, chalitza where there is no shlichus. So there, in the case of a get, we could have a shliach for writing the get. Ha'omed al gabav kishliach amemuna lachtov v'lechavim b'ksivos. So again, in shchita you need the kavana of the shochet. There's no shlichus in shchita, and therefore ha'omed al gabav is not going to help you, says the Rashba. And that's why the Gemara says that that the only way that gadol omed al gabav could work if you hold that there is no din of kavan and shchita, but if you hold there's a din of kavan and shchita, and even if there are those who are witnessing the ma'aseh shchita and it's kosher, but nevertheless you need kavan, and gadol omed al gabav doesn't work. Why? Because there's no shlichus in shchita. Okay, fine. But he says that in get there is shlichus, and therefore kavanas ha'adam, which means the gadol omed al gabav mitztarefes ke'ein din shlichus. So you have the katan who's writing the get, and then you have a shlichus on the kavan of lishma of the get.
We split up the shlichus. One does the ma'isa, one does the
kavan does. Mitzarach BIyun. So he quotes from Naftali Trop and others. All the shkaps and the trops, and they say what? My Indian shlichus. What is the Rashba talking about shlichus? Yesh shlichus bekavana and das. We know that this shlichus on a ma'isa. I can send you as a shliach to do the ma'isa gerish, but there's no such thing as shlichus on kavana, shlichus on das.
So says there's no shlichus even by ksivas get either.
would not be just ksiva abal. But I'm saying even if I would grant the Rashba's assumption that there is such a requirement of shlichus, that's only if it's a gadol, but not a gadol. But now we're asking, what do you mean? Well, what's the shlichus in the case of kavana? I can understand that maybe the shliach for the ksivas I get for the Masechet ksiva against Tosas, like you say, but the Rashba is free to disagree with Tosas on that. But to say that it's kavana not on the Masechet shlicha, but kavana on the, but rather shlichus on the Masechet, but rather shlichus on the kavana, that's a no. Now, truth be told, he tries to answer this question in the name of the Granat of Naftali Chop. So take a look. We're fast forwarding now to page Mem Aleph. On the right column, the Hiksha Hadranat by Imre Moshe. Right, the Imre Moshe was a Talmud of Chaim Brisker. Shemidibri Arashba, b'shem Rabbeinu Harav, shekasa de Moil Gadol Omer Al Gaba v'Makom Shmo Ila Shlichus. Hirish et Sarach Shlichus L'Ksivas again against Tosfos, who says you don't need Shlichus.
But then you have a different problem. What Tosfos was answering.
So now, if there's Shlichus L'Ksivas again, and that's a requirement, now the Gadol Omer Al Gaba, according to the Rashba, is going to supply the Shlichus. Ubiru, etc. Ain't sarch the shlichus al maisa ksiv. Wow, this is a big chiddush that BIyun, when he requires shlichus, it's not on the maisa shchita. V'lo nemar din shlichus al rak al yichud aget l'shma. So in a sense, he's trying to close the gap between Tosas and the Rashba. It's not that the Rashba went to the other extreme and requires shlichus ksiv. In that sense, the Rashba is on the same turf as Tosfos, that all you need is tzivui abba. You don't need shlichus. But on the other hand, according to this sheet, we'll call it BIyun, you need shlichus in ksivas again, but not because the Masechet ksiva, but rather to create a lishma.
So he's calling the tzivui. It sounds like he's just what Tosfos called tzivui abal. He's calling shlichus.
But the pella is that we're really operating within shlichus here. You follow what I'm saying? The Tosfos is rejecting shlichus. He's operating within shlichus, and he's saying that's going to be the difference between shchita, for example, and get. Gadol Omer Al Gaba only operates where shlichus operates, and we're operating within shlichus. But the shlichus is not on the Masechet ksiva, but rather on the lishma. So if the siva of the katan is a ksiva, he's not a shliach. But the problem is you need the lishma. On the lishma, there is shlichus, and the Gadol Omer Al Gaba is going to fill that role as the shliach to generate lishma. V'lachein moila sivas katan shegadol Omer Al Gaba mechavim lishma shum shegadol mechavim lishma b'shlichus habal. V'ilu masha katan kosev moil, because there's no need for shlichus and ksiva. So this is an amazing chiddush of Rav Naftali Trump, that the reason why, according to the Rashba, Gadol Omer Al Gaba is operative is not because we're being mitzaref two categories of shlichus. One shlichus on the kavanah l'shma and another separate shlichus on the ksiva. But no, we don't need shlichus on the ksiva. And if the child did a perfectly adequate ksiva, that itself would be fine. The problem is that we need shlichus habal to generate the l'shma. Here's where we're going to introduce shlichus of the Gadol Omer Al Gaba. So again, what Rav Naftali is doing for us is he's circumventing the problem of tziruf, which is a major objection that we had to this Rashba.
And we don't need any connection between the right. We just need someone to define this as lishma. It doesn't need to be the person writing the get.
Right. I can make you a shliach to create that kavan of lishma. But the lishma has to come from the Baal. Right? He's going to generate the lishma. It's almost as if, you are creating a get. Why? Because Rabbi Lazar is of the opinion that there's no get without lishma. So the get is created as a heft of a get for a bar creases by creating lishma in the get. Creating lishma in the get is like creating the get itself. So instead of ksiva, we have the creation of lishma. And that requires the Baal, or his bamikok, his shliach. And the Gadol is going to do that action of creating a get on behalf of the Baal through Torah Shlichus. and has nothing to do with instructing the Katan. The Katan could have earplugs in his ears, or the Cherish for sure doesn't even need earplugs, and they don't hear a word that came from the Gadol Omed Al Gabo. Because Rashi's telling me that the Gadol Omed Al Gabo is going to have to communicate and direct the Katan. Forget about all that. The Gadol Omed Al Gabo is going to create the get. It's almost as if he's writing the get. He has no physical action of writing, but he is Al-Tidin creating.
I didn't see the Rashba inside, but is Rashba saying that God Omegavav is working through shlichos, or that when there's an area where there's shlichos, it reflects a certain control and ability to separate between the Maisa and the other components? Tefillin, it has to be your own body. It's your kavan. It's one.
You're disagreeing with Rabbi.
No, so I didn't. I was surprised.
Oh,
Okay.
yes,
Well, your disagreeing is more.
Yeah.
My disagreeing is a lack of understanding. Okay.
All right, but before
Right,
we
that
get
was-
to this, I think we
sounds
need
like
one
he's
more
writing here.
thing.
Like he's setting it up your way, but then doesn't follow through.
Right. So I thought.
Check the Rashba inside.
Right.
Remember, Luke. Learn this Rashba one day.
Okay, so now let's go back for a moment to Chalitza. And Tosas says that Gadol Omed Al Gavav would be operative in Chalitza. Now, Chalitza doesn't lend itself to Shlichus. So Tosas is certainly not on the same page as the Rashba. Now, if we go with the Rashba, we can understand very well the fundamental distinction between Chalitza and Get. Whereas Get requires, or shall we say, validates Gadol Omed Al Gavav because, as the Rashba, there is Shlichus in Gerushin. Chalitza doesn't lend itself to shlichus. You can't appoint a shliach to do the chalitza on your behalf, and therefore there cannot be a Gadol Omed Al Gavav. So that's fine. According to Tosas, on the other hand, Gadol Omed Al Gavav in the case of chalitza through the agency of Beis Din should be operative in chalitza, even though there's no shlichus in chalitza. So Tosas is not in agreement with the Rashba that in order to justify and validate Gadol Omed Al Gavav, you need shlichus. In Chalitza, Tosas is willing to, to validate or recognize Gadol Omed Al Gavav as operative, even though there's no chalitza, there's no shlichus in Chalitza. So in order to explain this, I want to go back for a moment to a Ramban. Where is this Ramban? This Ramban is in Masechet Yevamos on Daf Kuf Daled Amud Beis. You'll see it on the right column on page Mem Aleph. Kosav HaRamban. The Ramban writes the following: that Gadol Omed Al Gavav, according to Rav Huna, that's Roman numeral number 1 in this sugya, operates even in the case of a shota. Mishum Shaladaito, according to Rav Huna, hakavana nitzreches b'ksivas haget lishma hi kavanas koldu. So let's try to underline this word, this phrase koldu. Vehi sheyichtov oso menas litain oso leplons, meaning you don't have a clue what a get is all about. All you know is that this is being written in order to be delivered to so-and-so. Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel Sheveksivas HaTorah Lo Moil Gadol Omed Al Gavav. So that's number 3, Roman numeral number 3, that rejects Gadol Omed Al Gavav. Hu mishum shelidaito tzorech kavana gemura. So now the Ramban has set up 2 different categories of kavana. He's got one kavana which he calls kolduhu, and another kavana which he calls what? Kavana gemura v'tzorch bir. Ma chiluk bazeh? Ma'u kavana koldu, ma'i kavana gemura. Hello, b'pashtus tamid inyan hakavana shava shemiskavin lahochenes haget b'shvil legarish bo. So we would think that the kavana is for the gerishim, but Tosas, the Ramban is assuming that according to Rav Huna, no. You don't need kavana legerishim in order to generate lishma. You need kavana to deliver the get to the isha. And the nafkamina between those two definitions is going to be gadol omed al gaba, which means the following: that in a case of kavana gemura, then gadol omed al gaba of, and that's the shita of Shmuel, is not going to be valid. It's only that the Katan wrote the Torah, the Tofes, but not the Torah. Whereas according to Rav Huna, all you need is kavana koldu, and a Katan is capable through gadol omed, through the agency of the gadol who's omed al gaba, to create a kavana koldu, but not to create a kavana gemura. And here's the machlokas about how to understand lishma. Is lishma a kavana gemura, which means for the sake of gerushin, or is lishma a kavana koldu for the sake of delivering this document into the hands of the isha? And now he quotes Rabbi Aryeh Leib Malin. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Yeah?
My Rebbe used to quote him.
Yeah, he was a Talmud of the Brisker Road. And he says the following. His yeshiva in America was called Beis HaTalmud. I learned in yeshiva called Beis HaTalmud in Yerushalayim. The Rosh Yeshiva was Schwartz, was different yeshiva with the same name. He says the following. L'Rav Huna, dai b'kavana al menas litno leba. Omar, l'rtzos es tachlis tzuras maisa gerish. In other words, the lishma in the get makes the get omed lemaisa nasi. Do you follow? So what's lishma? Lishma means that this get is being written in order that Ploni would deliver the get to Plonis. That's the lishma. Even if you don't understand what is the heter of gerish, you have no clue about the gerish. You just have to set up the get as what? I knew this was going to happen. As what? As a ma'aseh. So das Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel tzar kavana al das sheigarish the get said. Please underline the word das here, because until now he was operating with the word kavana, but now he substitutes for the word das. Klomar sheyavin sheyesh totzah b'ma'aseh, that the get itself is going to achieve a afkas ishus and a heter ha'isha l'tor grusha. Or if you skip a few lines, he says that l'das Rav Huna dai b'kavana ha'mafareshes es ha'maisa l'shma kebila v'tzitzis, l'das Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel tzarich l'chamin l'what l'chalos ha'gerishim. So we have now two definitions of kavana, one accepted by Rav Huna, and therefore gadol omed al gaba is operative, and that's called kavana to set up the get for the Maisa Gerushin. And now we have a different definition, which is called in the Ramban's language kavana gemura, and that's the definition of Shmuel, namely that the kavana has to be to set up this get for the halos Gerushin, for the heter isha l'shuk, not for the Maisa Gerushin and the Nesino.
There's a difference between when you ask a kid, do you know what you're doing, and they can tell you what you're doing, versus do you understand all the implications of what's going to happen from this?
Correct.
That's kavana koldu versus kavana gemura.
Right. Kavana koldu means that this is a get that's going to, a document, I don't know what it's all about. Maybe it's a happy birthday card and a happy anniversary card that's being given from the Baal to the Ish. Whereas according to the kavana gemura, which he identifies as das, you need to understand that this get is the medium through which you create gerushin, or as you say, the totzah, the repercussion that follows, of course, issues. Now, what I wanted to do with you for a few minutes, if we have that time, I hope you don't have to run.
They might have to run, but we're here.
Right? Is to take a look at this essay, was written by Rebbe Shalavim, called BIyun Gidrei Hanesud, which you'll find in your phone. And thank you.
This is what I photocopied?
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's the first of the two pages or the second of the two
This
pages.
is the first.
Okay, good.
I see the title here.
You can see the title, it came out.
Yeah, yeah.
You can even see the author.
He's no Howie, but he's okay.
You can even see the author in the top right corner.
No, it's not. You shouldn't blame Daniel as opposed to Howie, because he was just photocopying what I did. I didn't do a good job. It was a shadow.
I don't think you got enough of the Machaber focused on the screen.
I guess, Steve, you didn't get my message on the phone. Okay.
He's joining.
Yeah, I guess WhatsApp is not the best way of communicating, Steve.
Oh,
So, but if you don't mind, so you have two choices: either come back a little later, as I said, or you can try to follow the end of the year. Okay, then.
that's fine. I just got in the apartment.
Okay. You're coming back from davening on Rosh Chodesh, right? That's why, plus Rosh Chodesh, as I said in the message, we started our shir a little bit later, so that's going to push it. Okay. The Gemara in Ksubis on Daf Ayin Dalet Amud Beis says the following in the name of Yochanan: a man was choleit liavimto almanas shetiten masayim sus. And the question is, if she, meaning the Yavama, does not deliver the goods and fork over masayim sus, is the chalitza completely destroyed?
Tonight.
And the question is there Tanai in chalitza? Correct? So guess what? The Gemara says that there's no Tanai in chalitza. Why? Because the parsha of Tanai is the parsha of Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain, and the Yerusha of Eretz Yisrael, which is the subject matter of Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain, is Efshal Kiyumei Al Yidei Shalit. I can send a shliach to make a kinyan on the karka, in this case, the karka of Eretz Yisrael. So we have a principle. Kol milsa, anything that's Efshal Kiyumei Al Yidei Shliach, Isa b'Tanai, you can make it Tanai. Milsa, the less of a shliach, less of it. Chalitza doesn't have shlichus, and therefore it doesn't have Tanai. So the Gemara asks the following question: what about Kiddushay Bir? There's no such thing as sending a shaliach for Kiddushay Bir. And therefore, what happens if a man was Mekadosh and Ishali, they bila with a Tanai? Are you going to tell me the Tanai is not Kal?
The Kiddushin can be done on the shliach.
Right.
Right? Every Kiddush can be done on the Shliach with the exception of Kiddushay Bir.
Mhm.
And yet we assume that Tanai is meaningful even in Kiddushay Bir. So Gemara answers, so we need a separate hekesh that equates kesef shtar with beer, or beer with kesef and shtar, if you want to say it that way. And therefore, we apply the principle that just like there's Tanai that's meaningful and valid in Kiddushin kesef and shtar, so too there's Tanai that's meaningful in Kiddushin beer, even though it's less than shtar. Factor of Kibbutz, I don't understand. If you're coming with a hekesh, and therefore there's Tanai in Bia and Kiddushay Bia, so why don't we come to the exact opposite conclusion, that even in something where there is no shlichus, you could still make a Tanai. There's no shlichus in Kiddushay Bia, and yet through this hekech we derive that Tanai is meaningful. So for example, in Chalitza, where there is no shliach, we should come to the conclusion that Chalitza, like Bia, even though there's no shlichus, there is Tanai. And the Gemara has established that there's no Tanai in Chalitza. So if he does the Chalitza al Menashe Tikit Masayim Sus, even though she never paid him a single Sus, the Chalitza is valid. But why? You're telling me, well, because it's less of a shlichus. Well, Kiddushay Bia is less of a shlichus, and yet you make a Tanai, and it's a valid Tanai in Kiddushay Bia. So here we quote Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim wants to know what is the connection here between what we call the interdependence between shlichus and Tanai. Why is it that if there's shlichus, there is Tanai. If there's no shlichus, there's no Tanai. So Reb Chaim builds his case on Tosfos. Tosfos in Masechet Ksubis, Daf Ayin Dalet Amud Aleph, says the following: Masvar Yesh Lomar Tahainu Time the whole Vamaisa Kol Kach Biyodo Sheyochel Lekaymo Al Yidei Shliach Svaro Shehei Kmochem Biyodo Lashvuye Beitzna. Tosfos adds the word Biyodo. If it's biyodo to make a shliach, then it's biyodo to create a Tanai. If it's not, like in the case of Chalitza, biyodo to create a shliach, then it's not biyodo to create a Tanai. So Chaim asks, this sounds very, very technical. Just because it's biyodo for a shliach, therefore it's a fact it's biyodo to make a Tanai, we're missing something. Says Reb Chaim, and this is going to have a tremendous impact on the whole issue of Suin B'Tnai. He says the following. Shlichus operates in kinyonim and in Gittin and Kedushin. Why? Because we have bailus over the totsas hamaisa, meaning that you are given bailus to create a chalos kinyan, a chalos issues, a chalos hafkos issues. And what generates that chalos? He says what generates that chalos is das. Das means that I have bailus over it, and my das is my exercise of my bailus. And Mimela, what's Tanai? Tanai is also halach in das. That since my das generates the chalos, I can decide through my das if and when that chalos should be chal. However, in the case of chalitza, even though we require kavana, but we don't require das. What generates the chalos heter hayavama l'shuk? On the one hand, the choletz does together with the choletz is the maisa chalitza, but now the Torah itself steps in and creates the heter l'shuk. So therefore, all you need is to set up a maisa chalitza. And to set up a maisa chalitza, all you require is havana. You don't require das. Hence, since it's not halacha in das, therefore you're not a bailim to create a shliach. And hence, if you're not a bailim to create a shliach, you're not a bailim to create a tanai. All you have to do is do a maisa with kavana, but not with das. You are not the bailim. The bailim of the chalos eter isha l'shuk in the case of a yavama is the Torah itself. And the Mela, according to Reb Chaim, we could answer Kivega's question. Why? Because even though we have a hekesh between Kedushay Kesef and Shtar to Kedushay Bia, that's only because all three of them require das. The fact that you cannot send a shliach for Kedushay Bia, that's a technical issue. But as far as what generates the chalos issues, Kedushay Bia are identical to Kedushay Shtar and Kedushay Kesef, it's das. And therefore you could certainly create a tie. The fact that there's no shlichus is not a gili milsa. It doesn't indicate that we lower it from das to kavana. Definitely Kedushay Bia through the Sekesh is a Kedushin of das. And the das generates the issues. He is the bailim to create the issues. He cannot send the shliach for a different reason, because the Maisa Bia doesn't lend itself to shlichus. But that's halach in the Maisa Bia. That's not halach in das. As far as das is concerned, he really does have das to create a shliach. But again, the shlichus can't work because of the nature of Kedushay Bia. Once you define in Kedushay Bia the requirement is das, then we understand why tonight will be meaningful. And if you take a look at this page, the second page, so again, the final conclusion of everything we're saying is that whereas Kedusha requires das, and therefore lends itself to shlichus and to t'nai, but chalitza is not a look of das, but rather a look of what? Of kavanah. Now the question is, what about lishma? If we're going to say that lishma is only a look of kavanah, it's not a look of das, maybe that's what the Ramban has in mind when he says kolduv, kavanah kolduv. And the nafkamina is going to be gadol omed al gabo, because in the case of a katan, he is capable of kavanah. Why? Because when we talk about bar das, we talk about das to create a chalos. But here, in the case of what's called of lishma, we don't need das to create the chalos. Hence, we understand why Tosas holds a gadol omed al gabo is meaningful and valid in the case of chalitza, because chalitza does not require das, as we saw. And that's why there's no t'nai in chalitza. There's no shlichus in chalitza. But chalitza requires kavana. Well, guess what? A katan is capable of kavana. He's not a bar das, but he's a bar kavana. And therefore, gadol omed al gabo will guarantee that the katan will have kavana. And that's what I see in this page here. this is
Here's the end one.
I just want to tell you where this is from. Rabbi Reichman, writes what's called Rishimo Shiurim. This is a Rishimo Shiurim on Sanhedrin. You could go to your local store and ask for it, but you'll be doing something that they would do in the Vardik in the Bali Bus. They would ask questions that are ridiculous. So don't even bother going into a store because this is I got a what's the word? A preview of coming attractions, whatever.
Yeah, this isn't the publication. This is when it looks like in print. Yeah, this doesn't.
This is in a Word document.
Oof.
Okay. And the Gemara establishes that there's something called das acheres mak, which means that a gadol could be mocked as something to a cotton and no kinyan without das konen. So how could das acheres mak not operate? And Tosfos says it operates midin schir. What Rav Salvation proves, again, that's the first part of the Shia, page 6 of this, that in the case of Sechia only operates midin shlichus. So how does the das acheres mak generate a das konen through shlichus through Zechia, which is mikam shlichus, when the katan is a lav bar hochi of shlichus? Says the Rav, based on Reb Chaim, Yesod b'din kol she'ena b'shlichus ena b'tnai ksuas daf ayin dalid. Again, the article from the Rebbe in Shalavim was about 15, maybe 20 years earlier than this one. So don't, okay. Meaning he generates the chalos. To create the chalos with das, but rather it's halacha of kavana and not halacha of das. So there's no shlichus and there's no what? There's no tanai. Okay, fine. We're not going to go through the entire raya, but he says, based on Reb Chaim, who says that in chalitza all you need is kavana and not das, and the chalos of heter through the chalitzas is something that comes through shamayim. Lefizeh, in the next paragraph, Yeshlomi the Tosfos Shvilei the schia kalamitam shlichus hakar for the hdin to be in das bailim. When you need das bailim, then we're going to say that schia is shlichus, because in order to create the chalos, you need das bailim, and if you need das bailim, then shlichus operates, because the bailim could create a shliach, or someone else could be a self-appointed shliach on his behalf. Midin schia. Like, for example, which we saw in the case of chalitza, where you don't need das bailim, but now we're extending it today to the kavana lishma get, is then you can have a chalos and you don't need shlichus, because there is no shlichus in a case where there's no das bailim. The nearer the hechta kinyan chal mikoach das koner shalazocher. However, in the case of das acheres mak, the masha en came be offered the das akinyan chalal yidei adam acher. In other words, the das mak without the das koner. The yesh das acheres mak no so azay yesh lomish hazocher, right? Who's receiving this gift? Let's say, en yochel yosas shliach. So that das acheres mak means that we circumvent the entire parish of shlichus, and the mela, since you don't need das, you don't need shlichus, and therefore, if you don't need das, therefore we understand how this operates. So it's a kind of a schia that's not predicated on das, because we don't need das. With das. Okay, then. So this is where we'll stop for today. And
Oh, wow.
I have a feeling that perhaps we should be taking maybe a little bit of a ben